Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. The creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers. How the heck are you? We are almost to the end of April now. How are you doing? How is your spring? How is your year going? Jen and I were set to record today, but she needed to take a little break. She has a lot going on, and I have a very simple life. So Jen is resting, and I'm going to record. What I want to talk to you today about is the wound of too much. And Jen and I had something that came up. We were going to talk about it today, but it's as usual, it's all my stuff. So Jen doesn't really need to be here because it was all my stuff. That wound of too much and how much that shows up. And also Jen and I had something else, and then it came up in another relationship when someone gives information that to me feels like a no, and it's not, but my brain hears a no and makes a rule, and it doesn't work for me, but I follow it because it's the rule, even though it doesn't work for me. So I want to talk to you about that. And then I also want to talk a little bit about this wound of too much and how it isn't always about me, but it may be about the other person's capacity. But because of our wounding and our real trauma and relationship trauma with people leaving us, ghosting us, telling us we're too much, and we didn't have the ability or the awareness to go that maybe it's their capacity. I want to talk to you a little bit about that today. The first thing that I want to talk about is last week, Jen was going out. She left me, we use the app Marco Polo. We call it a Polo. So she left me a video, and saying that she was going out, and it was the afternoon. I think Steve was out of town, and I wanted to respond back to her. But what she said was, I'm going to be in the car driving. Don't leave me a Polo, but you can text if you want to. And I thought she's going out with a friend, so I assumed the two of them would be together. In my mind, it would have made sense to me to leave a Polo that she could have listened to it sometime in the future. And generally, if we need each other, we text. So what she said didn't make sense to me, but what it brought up for me is she said, don't Polo. And even though she was going out, I thought, well, maybe there's a little alert sound when you get a Polo. And I thought, well, she keeps her phone on silent all the time, so that wouldn't be the problem. I'm trying to understand the rule here. I made the decision not to send her a Polo. And that night when I went to bed, I thought, well, I could send her a Polo. We're 3 hours different. So sometimes I'll send a Polo, and then in the morning when she wakes up, she'll send me a Polo. But I didn't do either of those things. I didn't get very distressed about it outwardly, but I have a sense that I've held trauma for so long that there's probably stuff going on internally that I'm not aware of. Went to bed in the morning. My husband and I were talking, and he said, seems like something's going on with you. And I explained to him what had happened with Jen. And I was able to say, like, I know she loves me. I know she cares. I know she's not restricting me. But because of how she said it, I'm really stuck on this rule about she said not to Polo. Does that mean just last night? Does that mean this morning? If you're not neurodivergent and this doesn't make sense to you, then maybe this isn't the episode for you to listen to. However, if you are neurodivergent, more specifically, if you are autistic, and rules are important and understanding rules is important to you, then this, my sense, will deeply resonate. And as he and I talked about it, he's like, why don't you just ask her? And sometimes we just need that nudge. So I sent her a text that summarized what I was saying. She's like, do you want to FaceTime? And it's interesting, when we started talking, first we clarified, but then the feelings came up. And I was really clear that the feelings that I was having were not really about this situation with Jen. I feel very secure in our attachment, but what it activated for me was this historical sense of somebody trying to contain me, shrink me, size me down in a way that felt more palatable to them. And because, I've just realized that I'm autistic formally less than a year, although I suspected for probably close to 2 years now. There's a lot of unpacking that I'm doing, and I'm seeing how much trauma I have, which surprises me because I've done years and years of therapy and thought I dealt with all my trauma. There's more. and how much I've just learned to dissociate, to detach, to not feel it. Kind of what happened the night before. And maybe it was because I felt like I had a secure attachment with Jen. I don't know. But there was lots and lots of grief that came up. And it really was about how many times somebody has tried to make me smaller so that I fit for them. And as Jen and I talked, she's like, just because I said don't polo doesn't mean you couldn't have polo. And I'm like, I didn't want to make you mad. And she said, I don't think I've ever been mad at you. And again, it was kind of interesting because this is very, very young. I'm a 60-year-old adult. This is very, very young trauma. And this fear that I'm going to say or do or not do something, and then Jen's going to get mad at me. And again, this isn't about Jen because we've got a pretty solid relationship. But it was just very interesting. And in the way that Jen has invited me to kind of pull her in when she gets busy and is not as responsive, I asked for her, I want permission to try and get you to get mad at me because I feel like I'm walking this line. And I think for those of us that are autistic, that have a PDA profile, pathological demand avoidance, or pervasive persistent drive for autonomy, we're very high internalizers. For those of us that have this internalized profile, if you're high masking, late diagnosed, assigned female at birth, most likely, I'm not saying exclusively this, but this is my experience, we're very high internalizers. And so what that means is we navigate everything and keep it pretty tucked in. But in order to keep a sense of autonomy, we tend to be great people pleasers. We don't want to get people mad. We figure out what people want before they have to ask for it. So we maintain that sense of autonomy. So we're very good performers. We are easy to be around. We anticipate people's needs. And I think because of that aspect of autism for me that likes sameness and repetition, we can call it rigidity, I think we also bend over backwards to try and appear that we're flexible and that we don't have that rigidity. And we do have that, some of us have that preference for sameness. So there are so many things that come into play. And if you are assigned female at birth, especially if you're older, I think that females are socialized to not make people uncomfortable, to be polite, to figure out what everybody else wants. I think for me, all of these factors that I'm talking about get tangled up together. And so getting angry, being assertive can be challenging for us because we have been so socialized. And if you are autistic and if you have a PDA profile, I think that all of these come together. Now, currently, I'm recording this in March, 3/4 through March. There's some talk in the autistic community about PDA and if it's a valid diagnosis or not. I'm not willing to join into that discussion because I don't know enough about it. For me, PDA feels very real. And I'm only saying this that if you're listening to this at some point in the future and at some point somebody decides that PDA isn't a thing and I'm talking about it, I'm just saying for today, this is true for me and this is what I'm going to talk about. But it was just very, very interesting as Jen and I had this conversation to see how much wounding was there. And I think how many times I feel like people have tried to contain me. And it's really interesting. I have an acquaintance, and when we meet up, it's usually around me getting something that I really enjoy that brings me lots of joy. And I allow myself to kind of squeal and jump up and down and clap my hands, being very excited. And this person usually tells me like, whoa, girl, calm down. And I feel like you're kidding me. I am not someone who is generally very exuberant. I'm very contained and controlled. So on those few times when I'm very excited and spontaneous, I don't really want anybody stopping that. And it's just an interesting observation for how people say things and whether this person means it intentionally or it's just something that they say, that if you have been told that you're too much, when we hear these things, we take note and we listen. And it's interesting too, I've been noticed recently that the chair that I sit in for work, it's a desk chair, but I can kind of swing back and forth in it. And I am finding that I have this desire to move back and forth while I'm using Zoom with clients, and I use Zoom for other things. And it must have been very socialized out of me because I don't do it, because what I'm internally hearing is don't do that. That's a distraction. Sit still, look at people. And it's ableist of not allowing myself to stim and move my body in a way that works. And I'm just having these awarenesses, and I'm seeing lots of graphics around if we have these needs to stim and to move and ask for accommodations and we're not, that can be very ableist. And if you're high masking, we've had to do all that stuff to survive. And then once you find out you're autistic, then how do you navigate that? Because it can feel challenging. The other thing that's really interesting is I saw a meme that I posted on Facebook, and I can't remember exactly what it said, but it said something like, if you ask me how I am, please expect to hear the full story. Or if I ask you how you are, I expect to hear the full story. And I posted this, and somebody that is in one of the groups that I'm involved in responded, well, maybe not for everybody. And of course, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, she's saying for me, because if you ask me how I am, it's very unlikely that I'll say, fine, I'm going to tell you honestly what's going on. And I saw her the other day in one of our activities and we talked about it. And I think this is another common thing, that we tend to think that that response was about me and maybe I've overshared with her. And there's somebody else in this group and she said, no, it's really about this other person who, I'm not going to explain why she said what she did, but she made it very clear that it wasn't about me because she's on my social media. She knows that I'm autistic because I post my episodes there, but I haven't really talked to a lot of people about announcing that I'm autistic. And I said, since you're on social media and you know what's going on with me, I sometimes miss reading social cues. And she's like, no, this is not about you at all. But I think that all of these things that I'm talking about are things that we tend to be very aware of and alert to because it's caused ruptures in relationships. We've gotten feedback. And this reaction that I'm telling you about, like, was that me? Like, ooh, did I do something wrong? And kind of tying into this, I took a couple of lessons on how to crochet. I'm needing a new special interest. And I really enjoyed it. And then a friend of mine's daughter is having a baby. So I thought I really want to make a baby blanket. And I've been trying to find a stitch that I think will work that I can do and practicing. And I wasn't going to talk to my friend about it. I wanted it to be a surprise, but I ended up talking to her about it because I had some concerns about looser weaves where little toes and fingers can get stuck. And when I shared this with my friend, she's like, oh, somebody else is making a blanket. You should make a hat. And this is not about the friend that said anything. What I heard is only one person can make a blanket. You can't make a blanket. You have to make a hat. So what did I do? I started looking at tutorials, and last night I worked on a hat. It had an edging on it that I don't like, so I need to figure out a way to do a different type of finish on it. But part of me thought, like, there's no rule that says only one blanket. There can be a blanket for the car. There can be a blanket for the diaper bag. There can be a blanket for when the baby goes out somewhere. Like, why is it that I allowed one person saying, oh, somebody's making a blanket, you should do something else? And I'm just wondering if this resonates for you. And what is it for me that doesn't allow my own sense of, I bought a lot of yarn, a lot of yarn to make baby blankets. And this little hat that I made took up a fraction of the yarn that I bought. Of course, I can return the yarn. I can exchange the yarn. It's not really about that, but that I had a plan and I'd been watching all these tutorials and getting ready to make a baby blanket. And all of a sudden, one person says, no, you should do something else. And I'm like, I have to follow the rules. So does this resonate for you? And then the last part of this that I want to talk about is that we often have this fear of being too much. I know for me, it's very, very ingrained, and I still worry about it. There's somebody new that I'm going to be doing an activity with, and we texted a little bit, and I said, I'm very excited. I get very enthusiastic. If it's a little too much for you, let me know. Like, I've gotten feedback that people are just not accustomed to how I communicate. And maybe I shouldn't say anything, but I feel like I want to name it. Maybe, I don't know if that's correct or not. But I talk with my clients and I have this fear of being too much, but we often think that the too much is only us and we don't see it in relationship to somebody else. And I remember when I first bought the first 2 kayaks that I had, and getting a roof rack and a system was a big, hairy deal. And it ended up costing very close, probably 2/3 to what the cost of the 2 kayaks and all the gear that I had bought was. And so I was really trying to figure out all the options. And it's interesting with this crocheting, I'm seeing the same thing. I'm wanting to watch the videos. I'm wanting to practice on practice yarn. I'm wanting to make sure that I can do it. I want to know what I'm doing instead of just picking up the yarn and practicing on the actual yarn to make the thing. So I like to be very prepared and have lots of information when there are new things. And I remember walking the dog with my husband, and he just didn't seem that interested in I asked him what was going on, and he said, I'm just like, we've been talking about the car racks for a long time, and you can talk, but I don't have a lot of input. I'm like, oh, do you have kayak fatigue? And he did. And that was okay. And I was really glad that he told me. So does this mean that I'm talking about the racks too much, or does this mean that we've reached his capacity? And for those of you that have that wound of being too much, you most likely have the wound of not enough. I don't have anything to say. I'm not that significant. I'm boring. I'm not interesting. I don't want to take up space. It's really the same wound, but we tend to have a primary wound, which is the too much. And then the secondary wound is the not enough. And so can we start looking at this wound of too much in relationship to somebody else and their capacity? And what I did is there were other people that were happy to listen to me talk about the kayaks and the racks and all of the things. And so I talked to them about it. And if I wanted to talk to my husband, I'm like, where's your kayak fatigue at? And why don't we talk about this in terms of the other person's capacity? That nobody is too much. And if you have young children, you know that they come home and they want to tell you these long stories with lots of details that may not be very linear. Is it that the child is being too much, or is it that you've had a hard day and it's hard to track and it's harder to focus? I mean, this is a little bit different because you wouldn't hopefully tell a child that they're being too much and to stop talking. But when you have a sender of communication and a receiver, what is the capacity of the receiver and how much information does the sender need to send? And are either one of them wrong if the capacities don't match? And can we start talking about this more in terms of both people as opposed to the narrative being around the person who's, quote, too much? This theme came up quite a few times this week in sessions that I had with different clients over different contexts, but it was pretty much the same thing. And I think often the narrative is focused on the person who's neurodivergent, the person who is more cautious, the person who verbalizes more needs, the person who needs more information, the person who may have been told that they're too much. And the focus is always on them as opposed to what is the other person's capacity, and is the other person communicating what their capacity is? And when they reach capacity, how is that being communicated? And are they taking responsibility for their capacity as opposed to just one person is being too much? And I think this is really important to look at. And even if you have couples that are both neurodivergent, this still comes up. It happens if you have a neurotypical or an autistic person and an autistic person, if you've got a neurodivergent person and a neurotypical person. I mean, these dynamics come up, and can we start looking at that it's both people? Now, if you have somebody that's very close to you and they do not own their behavior, have limited insight, have limited willingness to look at their part and to do deep dives, and this may not be possible, and it's very possible that the narrative will continue to be that you are the problem and you are too much. I don't know what to tell you about that. I think if you are not in relationship with someone who is aware of who they are, how they feel, what they need, are able to set limits and boundaries, can communicate, hold space for you, be curious, have empathy, I don't know that you can actually do this work because both people have to be able and willing to do it. But I really would love to see this narrative shift away from one person being too much as opposed to what is the capacity of the other person. You know, and I can tell you, like, my husband goes and golfs and he comes home and he wants to talk about golf. And I love my husband and he's so great. When I come home from paddling, he asks me all these questions every single time. Is there a lot of activity on the water? Did you see a lot of people? Did you see any wildlife? What was it like? What was the temperature? He asks me all these engaging questions. He doesn't kayak, but he loves me and he wants to engage with me about something that I'm passionate about. So when he comes home from golfing, I really do my best to be present and ask him questions. And it's not that I have a tremendous interest in golf, but I care about my husband and I want to engage with him. When my husband goes to Laughlin, which is in the United States, it's like a little Las Vegas. It's like a rinky-dink Las Vegas. He and a friend go. They've gone for 18 years. They go at least once a year, sometimes more than that. Every night, they go back to the hotel room and they journal about what they've done for the day. So they have probably a book by now of everything from their 18 years of their trips together. And when Steve would come home from Laughlin, he'd want to read the highlights of their trip. And I really struggled with it. I think it may have been more, and I noticed this last time when he came home, that there are two parts to this. One is the transition of me being alone for a week and him coming back into what feels like it's my space. And that needs to be a very slow, easy transition with very little demands. And so the day that he gets home, seeing pictures, talking a lot about the trip, it's just a little hard for me. And I feel like I just need to reintegrate sharing space with somebody else. And as I'm telling you this, I'm thinking about when I've come back from seeing Jen. From the moment he picks me up at the airport, I'm a chatterbox chatting about my experience. But our needs are very different. He doesn't have a problem with me being back home. He misses me when I'm gone. It's not that I don't miss him, but his need for space and alone time is very different than mine. He likes engagement. He likes conversation. And so it would be very easy for me. And I think I had some of this come up when I was thinking about sharing this with you. Like, ooh, do I want to share this? And so I did notice that this last time he did not share their notes with me when he came home. And he often waits for me to ask to see pictures. And so I'm wondering if in this instance, he has this, it's a little bit different because it's more around my interest and my capacity to hear about things that are really outside of what I'm interested in, but I do care about him. So I think I need to have a conversation with my husband about why he didn't read those notes to me and how that is for him, because I do care and he listens quite a bit to all the things that go on for me. And so these are just ways that we can work on connection. And I think if you are neurodivergent, especially if you're autistic, there are things that we're very interested in, could talk about for days, and other things that, you know, if you have a partner or somebody that you care about or a child, we want to show interest because we care. And how do we find that balance? I think that is pretty much all that I have to say. If any of this resonates with you and you want to work with me, you can reach out to me at unapologeticallysensitive.com. I've got a sheet you can fill out on my website. I think that's all I have. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's how you're wired. You have a right to take up space. You have a right to be joyful, stimmy, quiet, want to have time alone, want to talk to people, want to not talk to people. Whatever it is that goes on for you is really okay. All of you is okay. It's okay to not be okay. And if you're not okay, I just want you to be safe, and we don't want you to be suffering. So the not okay is everyday not okay. But if something serious is going on, please reach out and get some support. It's okay for you to feel joy and contentment, excitement, connection, special interests. It's okay to be tired and zoned out and disconnected, as long as you're having some connection and it's working for you. I think that's all I have. Have a blessed day.